all of the other things that society aspires to. And you make the point as well in the end that India is going to be an example for the world. The world is watching as the largest, fastest growing major economy, one that's capable of tremendous momentum when India gets going. But it seems to me there are three areas of potential challenges, and I want to get your perspective on this. Policy, technology, and finance, where you're our industrialist on stage. You're talking about execution, right? This is where the rubber hits the road. You're not the professor talking about grand strategy. So when you talk about execution, what is it that you see in policy, one that has been the most enabling of being able to scale as quickly as you've started to do, and as India is certainly moving rapidly in renewables? But what is the remaining biggest challenge on policy that you would like to see improved?
So on the policy front, Vijayji, two things. What India has done exceptionally well over the last couple of years has been, as I said, a very significant debottlenecking of approvals. Permits, approvals, clearances. India's transformed completely at a fundamental level. If you look at renewables, India last year added 55 gigawatts of new renewable energy installations on the ground. That is the historic highest for the country ever. And that's been done because the government's been so proactive with regards to enabling the infrastructure to come up on the ground. What it has already started doing a lot of is how do you look at integration between the overall national electricity plan? How much thermal is coming in? How much renewables is coming in? When? Are the evacuation bottlenecks ready to be able to capture and evacuate that power? Is that being bottlenecked? Is the timing of the capacity addition in sync with the timing of the transmission capacity being added? There's a timing mismatch. So government has already started to streamline a lot of these things, but there is a little more streamlining that is required, which the government is already working on. So the constraint that you speak of, I believe, is just that. How do you look at systemic integration of everything coming together within the timelines that they're coming together in, so that no capacity gets stranded at the country level?
So you put your finger on what the energy experts in India really see as one of the important challenges. That is the grid in India, which has some tremendous qualities, meaning you have a national grid. It's heavily invested. It's a modern grid, and one that's improving. However, is not able to keep pace with the pace of additions of clean energy. So you're seeing a lot of curtailment. And so grid investment, presumably, is one area of investment. And we do see private sector investment around the world coming into transmission lines. That's one possibility. A second possibility, and I want you to refer maybe to the battery investments you're making, that gets to the technology point that I want to talk about, because one of the things that I'm a huge advocate of is energy storage on the grid. I wrote a story a couple of years ago talking about a battery revolution that's coming. And even internally at The Economist, there's a lot of skepticism. Those of you who are not in energy, you'll know, if you want to put people to sleep at a dinner party, start talking about energy. If you don't want to be invited back, start talking about energy storage for the grid. You'll never be invited back, right? But this was the #1 story on The Economist website globally for a week, even with competition of Trump in the Middle East and so on, because when one really looks at the battery revolution that's ongoing, the collapse in prices, the improvement in durability and longevity, the potential to transform clean energy from one time of day to another, if the rules are right and incentivize time shifting. So talk a little bit about that, because I know you have big plans for BESS, as it's called, battery energy storage for the grid.
Yes.
I was able to see some of this at firsthand, where you're scaling this up, but it depends crucially on the ability to monetize this, and only some places in India, as of now, have time of use pricing, for example, or other measures. So what can be done to accelerate this trend?
No, I think, first of all, your thesis is absolutely right. I think energy storage is an inevitability in India going forward, and at scales which no one would have possibly thought of or imagined. Us as a group, just us alone, we shortly, in the next couple of days, will have about 3 gigawatt hours of installed BESS capacity. That makes it one of the largest installed capacities anywhere in the world already in a single location. But that's not even the point, because our internal plan is to add between 10 to 15,000 megawatt hours, 10 to 15 gigawatt hours every year going forward.
Now, this is not free, right? Solar prices collapse. What is the business case for doing this for you?
The business case for this basically is when you have so much solar capacity being added across the country. There is a time of a day where all those capacities are generating power together.
Well, when it's hot, when it's sunny
hot,
during
and
the
when
day.
it's sunny during the afternoon.
Sure.
That's not necessarily always when the grid requires power.
Right.
Which leads to a drop in terms of grid prices.
Right.
So instead of supplying that electricity directly into the grid at that point in time, you can just use that energy to store in the batteries.
So you arbitrage, you do the time difference. But that only works if you get paid for it later.
Which India grid allows you to charge for. Right. So what we are doing today as a group, as our economic program is, we discharge 100% of that electricity into the grid between 6 and 10 p.m. which is evening peak hours. So the rates in the grid go somewhere between 8 to 10 rupees per unit at that time versus let's say 2.5 during the day.
Right.
So obviously batteries are expensive, so the economics have to work. But the evening peak that the country has available today gives us enough.
So no further reforms are needed. You're 100% satisfied.
Completely, 100%.
Okay, well you heard it here first. I'll tell the minister when he turns up as well. No need to do anything more. These guys keep building everything that they've promised. Unlike
that's why we're building on the ground what we're building, because we're comfortable with what the framework is.
Let's talk about finance. This is obviously enormous amounts of capital that's going to be required to build out, the green energy revolution, in tandem with continuing to keep the lights on with firm power that you talked about, the continued need to have, whether it's nuclear or thermal or whether it's battery energy storage firming. The early parts of the round-the-clock auctions, which are meant to address this, they have not been as successful as hoped, for example. So, what is the financing model if it's not the auctions? How is this going to be paid for?
So, Vijayji, we as a group always look at PPAs as just commercial instrumentalities of delivering power. What's real at the end? And there is a certain supply. And there is a certain price that either the DISCOM or the consumer is willing to pay for a certain kind of power, looking at the overall affordability index in India. So that's the only thing that's real. PPAs and everything is just, they're synthetic instruments, the way we see it. So what is our focus? Our focus is to make sure that we generate an electron at the cheapest possible rate in the country. Because if we are the cheapest, no matter what cost is to generate or not, no matter what cost is to store it, as long as lights are on, our power will flow. So that's how we look at economics at a fundamental level. But to be honest, yes, financing about this remains is a difficult proposition, just because of scale, because of the sheer volume of capital that is required to fund this.
But it's not just volume, right? I mean, the cost of capital in India still remains higher than it is in developed markets, for example, although it's lower than it is in Africa, let's say, where the world has a higher perceived risk in doing business in Africa. You're in more developed capital markets. But accessing capital, you're paying more than an American developer in Texas would pay.
You're absolutely right. But at the same time, the cost of constructing projects is significantly lower. So if you look at both those things put together, the delivered cost of electron into the grid, which includes the financing cost, which includes the construction cost, which includes everything. India is one of the lowest cost of electron generation places anywhere in the world.
We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to press you on one final point, and that is something that's going to increase your costs, I would put to you, I'll challenge you. That is meeting the government objectives of supply chain domestication. I know that unlike many other players, you've been able to move upstream in the solar chain into ingots, into wafers. You're talking about polysilicon, although that's a very big step to take where the Chinese are very cheap and effective. Doesn't this increase the cost? Even if it improves, let's say, resilience and domestic Indian manufacturing ambitions, aren't you guaranteeing that power will be more expensive as a result of these investments?
Of course, the cost of power will increase. Of course, the cost will go up because when China manufactures north of 500 gigawatts, India is at 50.
Why not say thank you to the Chinese taxpayer for subsidizing these goods and welcome these products? Why are you reinventing the wheel? Because
we go back to the same theme, Vijayji, of resilience. Because what every interdependence, what the world has taught us over the last couple of weeks is that every single interdependence is a vulnerability. And when it's times of stress, times of war, times of difficulty, times of, not a very pretty global environment, every one of these interlinkages can be used to exert strategic pressure and influence. That is something India has learned. That is something I believe all of us have learned with whatever we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And the lesson that India has learned and the leadership in India has decided for what the right way for the country is going forward is that we need to make sure that we domesticate our supply chains no matter what the cost is. Because equally as there is a proposition of taking the advantage of Chinese taxpayers subsidizing it, there is equally a prerogative for the country where if they overnight increase, for example, we have no capacity here and they know that, and if you overnight increase prices by 40-50%, what can you do as a country? You'll have to immediately halt all renewable energy additions. So in a way, the capacity addition is not so much as a cost, but also as a hedge for any other country anywhere else in the world to think twice before taking a step of this sort.
Resilience doesn't come for free, but it may be an insurance worth paying for.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I believe.
We're just out of time. I see the red lights are flashing. Please join me in thanking Sagar Adani for joining us on stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to speak in front of such a distinguished audience. I don't think that this summit and its central theme could come at a more important time. With everything that we've learned in the last few weeks, it is clear that in this century, access to energy is the only thing that's going to define resilience. Today, resilience is no longer a concept that is confined to classrooms or simulated in war rooms. It is a reality of what the world faces today. We've all seen how a conflict in one region can disrupt supply chains across continents. We've all seen how shocks in energy markets can ripple through economies overnight. And in that world, the question for every economy today is not how fast you can grow, but how well can you withstand disruptions. And nowhere is that question more relevant or more consequential than in India. India today is a nation that is defined by aspiration. You see it everywhere. In young people stepping into a new economy, in farmers adapting to new realities, in entrepreneurs building with confidence. There is a deep collective belief that the future will be better than both the past and the present. But aspiration, my friends, by itself, unfortunately, does not build nations. It needs a foundation. And India's answer to all of its foundational challenges is energy and only energy. Water security needs energy for desalination, water treatment, water distribution. Food security needs energy for fertilizers, irrigation, logistics. Digital leadership needs energy for data centers, AI. So if resilience is the goal, then abundant, reliable, and affordable energy is the foundation. Let's put the scale of India's challenge into perspective. On a per capita basis, India's consumption is about 1/3 of the world average and 1/5 of China's. So if India is to become a developed country by 2047, we are not talking about incremental growth. We are talking about a structural leap. We're talking about adding nearly 2,000 gigawatts of new capacity to the India's energy grid over the next 2 decades. All this while ensuring that this energy remains affordable, accessible, and increasingly clean. That, my friends, is a scale of the opportunity, and that's India's most defining challenge. When you look globally, countries that have built resilience at scale have always done one thing exceptionally well. They've always secured their energy foundations. Most developed and prosperous countries are either energy independent or have built deep strategic energy partnerships. We don't have to look very far, as Vijayji was alluding to earlier, to find a more relevant example. China, despite being constrained in both oil and gas just like India, has systematically invested in significant energy resources domestically. They've built strategic reserves and they've strengthened and hardened supply chains. Yes, of course, it remains dependent on global energy flows, but the level of resilience it has built over the last 2 decades is very remarkable. And the outcome is not just energy security. It is industrial strength, economic stability, and global competitiveness. For India, the path forward is clear. We must electrify everything. We must reduce structural dependence on imported energy. We must build an energy backbone that is anchored in resources that are available within our country. That is India's only credible path to long-term stability. But of course, electrification at scale demands one thing above everything else, and that is a massive growth in electricity supply. And this is where we must be pragmatic. Renewables will and must scale rapidly. Storage technologies will continue to evolve, but there are real constraints, particularly both around land and intermittency. Which means that to truly close this gap, India must adopt a portfolio approach. We must leverage fully every single energy source available to us. Renewables, yes. Hydro, yes. But also efficient thermal and nuclear. Because without firm, scalable baseload power, the math simply does not work. This is not optional for India, it is inevitable. It would be very incomplete to not recognize the role that the government and the country's leadership has played in enabling this journey. Over the last decade or more, India's leadership has played an exceptional role in cutting red tape, getting rid of unnecessary and outdated regulations, revitalizing public undertakings, and encouraging private enterprises. Countless macro and micro policy initiatives by the government have resulted in an environment where businesses can grow, flourish, and prosper. India has seen a clear, consistent, and increasingly execution-oriented policy stance. From accelerating infrastructure deployment, expanding renewable capacity, strengthening transmission networks, and enabling long-term investments, there has been both clarity of intent and continuity of action. And that continuity is the most critical enabler for resilience. Coming to the role of industry and specifically the Adani Group, at our core, we see ourselves not only as infrastructure operators, but as fundamental builders of India's energy backbone over the next several decades. Our chairman, Mr. Gautam Adani, has committed over $100 billion towards energy transition, one of the largest private sector commitments globally. But more importantly, it is not a mix of isolated investments. It is an integrated strategy. We are building one of the world's largest renewable energy portfolios, investing in large-scale energy storage, expanding transmission networks, and looking to develop green hydrogen ecosystems. Beyond energy, our presence across ports, logistics, airports, and data centers is a part of the same vision. And that vision is that resilience can never be built in silos. It can only be built through integrated ecosystems. Energy powers industry, logistics enables trade, and digital infrastructure drives productivity. And when these systems work together, you don't just create growth, you create durable resilience. So if I were to leave you all with one thought, it would be this. The real question is not whether India will need more energy. That already is very clear. The real question is how fast can we build it? Because in the end, resilience can never be built through intent alone. It is only built through execution, through the ability to create infrastructure at scale, at speed, and with purpose. And if India gets this right, we can deliver, if we can deliver abundant, affordable, and clean energy at the scale that is required, we will not just secure our own future. We will not just elevate 1.4 billion people. We will help stabilize the future of the global economy. Because India does not operate in isolation. What happens in India matters everywhere in every single corner of the world. That, my friends, is both our opportunity and our collective responsibility.